I thought the hardest part of my divorce was splitting up our furniture and explaining to my 12-year-old daughter Celia why Daddy wouldn't be living with us anymore. I thought hitting rock bottom meant losing my marketing job 3 months later when the company decided my position was expendable. I thought spending my last $1,000 on a beat-up boat that everyone called a money pit was the most reckless thing I'd ever do. Was wrong about all of it. The old man standing at my dock that crisp September morning wasn't just any stranger. His name was Roland, and he was clutching a faded photograph with hands that shook from more than just age. Those hands had seen war, had held loss, had spent 40 years searching for answers that I didn't even know I possessed. The photograph he held would shatter everything I thought I knew about the 1978 Chris craft I'd just finished restoring. This boat that I'd poured my heart, my sweat, and my last dime into wasn't just some abandoned vessel I'd rescued from a marina auction. It was a time capsule, a crime scene, and a gravestone all rolled into one beautiful piece of mahogany and fiberglass. When Roland looked at me with those haunted eyes and said the words that would change both our lives forever, I realized that sometimes the most desperate decisions we make aren't mistakes at all. Sometimes they're exactly where we're supposed to be, even when we have no idea why. My name is Tegan, I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how spending my last $1,000 taught me that some treasures are worth more than money. Some mysteries demand to be solved, and some strangers become the family you never knew you needed. The boat behind me gleamed in the morning sun, her fresh coat of navy blue paint reflecting the autumn sky. 3 weeks of 12-hour days had transformed her from a forgotten relic into something beautiful again. The mahogany trim I'd spent hours hand-sanding now glowed like honey. The engine I'd rebuilt from the ground up hummed quietly at idle. Every scratch, every dent, every imperfection had been carefully restored. But there was one mark I'd left untouched. A small anchor-shaped scar on the starboard hull, just below the waterline. Something about it felt important, like it belonged, there for a reason I couldn't explain. Now looking at the photograph in Roland's weathered hands, I understood why. The young man in that 40-year-old picture was standing proudly next to this exact boat, and that anchor-shaped scar was clearly visible in the background. Roland's voice was steady, but carried the weight of 4 decades when he spoke. "Miss, I hate to bother you, but I believe that's my brother's boat. His name was Samuel, and he disappeared on this lake in 1982. This boat was supposed to go down with him, but here she is, beautiful as the day he bought her." I felt my stomach drop as I looked from the photograph to my restored boat and back. Again. The young sailor in the picture had Roland's kind eyes and proud smile. He was maybe 25, wearing his navy dress whites, one hand resting possessively on the boat's rail. "I bought this legally at auction," I heard myself saying, though my voice sounded far away. "I have all the paperwork." Roland nodded slowly. "I'm not here to take her from you, miss. I'm here because my brother Samuel never came home from his last fishing trip, and I've spent 40 years wondering what really happened to him. Looking at how carefully you've restored her, I think maybe you're exactly the person who can help me find out." That's when I realized my financial desperation had led me to something much bigger than a boat restoration project. I'd stumbled into a decades-old mystery that someone had clearly wanted to stay buried. The question was whether I was brave enough to help dig up the truth. 3 months before Roland appeared with that photograph, I was sitting in a sterile conference room watching my 8-year marriage crumble into legal documents and custody arrangements. Derek sat across from me, his lawyer doing most of the talking while he stared at his phone. After 8 years together, he couldn't even look me in the eye when they divided up our life. "The house will need to be sold," his attorney was saying. "Mrs. Morrison will receive half the proceeds after the mortgage is satisfied." I remember thinking how cold it sounded, reducing our home to a financial transaction. The place where Celia took her first steps, where we'd hosted birthday parties and Christmas mornings, was just another asset to be liquidated. Derek finally spoke up. "What about the cottage?" He was talking about my grandmother Bertie's place on Lake Geneva. She'd left it to me when she passed 2 years earlier, and Derek had always resented that it wasn't considered marital property. The cottage was small, probably built in the 1940s, with knotty pine walls and windows that faced the water. Growing up, I'd spent every summer there with Birdie, learning to swim off the little dock and helping her tend the wildflower garden that still bloomed every spring. "The cottage remains Mrs. Morrison's separate property," my lawyer replied firmly. That cottage became my lifeline when everything else fell apart. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in June. By Thursday, Derek had moved in with his dental hygienist, a 26-year-old named Brittany who posted inspirational quotes on Instagram and called herself a wellness influencer. By the following Monday, I was trying to explain to Celia why Daddy wouldn't be reading her bedtime stories anymore. Celia handled it better than I did, honestly. At 12, she had this remarkable ability to accept change and adapt. Maybe it's because kids are naturally resilient, or maybe it's because she'd already figured out that her parents weren't particularly happy together. She hugged me tight that first night in the cottage and said, "It's okay, Mom. We'll be fine, just the two of us." I wanted to believe her, but the bank account suggested otherwise. 3 weeks after the divorce was final, my boss called me into her office at Meridian Marketing. I'd worked there for 6 years, building campaigns for regional businesses and managing social media accounts. I thought I was safe. I had good performance reviews, solid client relationships, and I'd never missed a deadline. "Tegan, I'm sorry, but we're restructuring the company," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Your position has been eliminated." The severance package was insulting. 2 weeks' pay and a form letter wishing me luck in my future endeavors. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon, carrying 6 years of my professional life in a cardboard box, while my former colleagues avoided eye contact. That night, sitting on the cottage's small porch overlooking the lake, I did the math on my laptop. After the house sale, lawyer fees, and Derek's half of everything, I had about $8,000 to my name. The cottage was paid for, thank God, but the property taxes were due in October. Utilities, groceries, Celia's school supplies, car insurance, health insurance I could barely afford. The list went on and on. I started applying for jobs immediately, but the market was brutal. Younger candidates with digital marketing degrees were willing to work for half what I'd been making. Every interview felt like a performance where I had to pretend my life wasn't falling apart. Celia started middle school that September, and I could see her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. She'd inherited my stubborn streak and Derek's analytical mind, and she was smart enough to know we were in trouble even when I tried to hide it. "Mom, are we poor now?" she asked one evening while we shared a box of mac and cheese for dinner. I wanted to lie to her, to protect her from the anxiety that kept me awake at night. Instead, I told her the truth. "We're struggling right now, baby, but we're going to figure it out." That's when I started spending time at the marina. Lake Geneva. Marina was a small operation with maybe 20 slips, tucked into a quiet cove about half a mile from the cottage. I'd discovered it during my evening walks when sitting alone in the cottage became too depressing. There's something peaceful about being around boats, even when you can't afford to own one. The marina owner, a weathered man named Pete, was getting ready for the off-season. Boats were being pulled out of the water, wrapped in tarps, and stored for winter. I started helping him with odd jobs, just to have something to do and maybe earn a few dollars. Pete paid me cash under the table, $20 here and there, for washing boats or organizing his chaotic office. That's how I found out about the auction. "County's selling off some abandoned boats next week," Pete mentioned one afternoon while I was coiling dock lines. "Been sitting in impound for years. Most of them aren't worth the towing fee, but there's one Chris craft that might be interesting if you've got the stomach for a project." I didn't have the stomach for anything at that point, but I was curious enough to show up on auction day. The 1978 Chris craft was slip number 18, tied to the very end of the furthest dock. She was a mess. The gel coat was chalky and cracked. The mahogany trim was gray with age, and the engine hadn't run in years. Most people walked past her without a second glance, but something about her spoke to me. Maybe it was the lines of her hull, still graceful despite the neglect. Maybe it was the solid feel of her construction when I stepped aboard. Or maybe it was desperation disguised as inspiration. I'd been feeling powerless for months, watching my life happen to me instead of taking control. This boat represented something I could actually fix. The bidding started at $500. An older man in coveralls bid against me half-heartedly before dropping out at $800. When the auctioneer's gavel fell, I was the owner of a 28-foot project that everyone else had written off. I spent my last $1,000 that day, plus maxed out my remaining credit card for supplies. Pete let me keep her in slip 18 and gave me a discount on the dock fee in exchange for continued help around the marina. For the next 3 weeks, that boat became my salvation and my obsession. I was at the marina every morning by 7, working until dark. Celia would come straight from school and do her homework in the cabin while I sanded and scraped and swore at stubborn bolts. The physical work felt good after months of feeling helpless. Every layer of old paint I stripped away, every piece of hardware I polished, every small repair I completed was proof that I could still accomplish something meaningful. The boat was teaching me things about myself I'd forgotten. I was stronger than I thought, more resourceful than I'd given myself credit for, and surprisingly good with my hands. Derek had always handled anything mechanical around the house, claiming I'd just make things worse if I tried to help. Now I was rebuilding a marine engine from YouTube videos and pure determination. Celia became my assistant and biggest cheerleader. She learned the names of tools and boat parts, held flashlights while I worked in tight spaces, and celebrated every small victory with genuine enthusiasm. Those afternoons working together were the first time since the divorce that I felt like I was succeeding as a mother. "She's going to be beautiful, Mom," Celia said one evening, running her hand along the freshly sanded hull. "What are you going to name her?" I hadn't thought about a name. The previous owner's choice had been painted over years ago, leaving only ghost letters on the transom. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Maybe something will come to me when she's finished." By mid-September, the transformation was remarkable. The hull gleamed with fresh navy blue paint. The mahogany trim had been restored to its original honey color, and the engine purred like a contented cat. I'd replaced the cushions, rewired the electrical system, and even installed a small refrigerator in the galley. My plan was simple: finish the restoration, take some professional photos, and flip the boat for enough profit to cover my expenses, and maybe have some breathing room while I continued job hunting. Conservative estimates suggested I could get $15,000 to $20,000 for her once she was complete. I was putting the finishing touches on the varnish work that September morning when Roland appeared at my dock. The morning mist was just lifting off the lake, and the air had that crisp quality that promised winter wasn't far away. I was proud, exhausted, and cautiously optimistic about my future for the first time in months. I had no idea that my carefully laid plans were about to be completely upended by an old man with a photograph and a 40-year-old mystery that would change everything I thought I knew about second chances. Roland's words hung in the crisp morning air like fog rolling off the lake. "I believe that's my brother's boat." The photograph in his weathered hands trembled slightly, not from age but from emotion he'd been carrying for 40 years. I looked at the young sailor in the picture again, then at my beautifully restored Chris Craft, trying to process what Roland was telling me. The boat that had become my symbol of hope, my path back to financial stability, my proof that I could rebuild something broken, apparently belonged to a dead man. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me already did. "The marina said this. Boat was abandoned. I have the auction paperwork, the title transfer. Everything's legal." Roland nodded slowly, his kind eyes never leaving my face. "Oh, I'm sure it is, miss. After 25 years, the county has every right to sell unclaimed property. But this boat was never supposed to be unclaimed. Samuel would never have abandoned her." He stepped closer to the boat, running his fingers along the hull with the reverence of someone touching a gravestone. When he reached the anchor-shaped scar I'd preserved, he stopped and smiled sadly. "Got that scar when Samuel was 19. Backed into a dock piling during a thunderstorm because he was too stubborn to wait for help. I told him he should have it fixed, but he said it gave her character." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the September morning. I'd left that mark untouched because something deep inside told me it belonged there. Now I knew. "Why?" "You said he disappeared," I managed. "What happened?" Roland's expression darkened. Samuel went out fishing on October 15th, 1982. Said he'd be back before dark. The Coast Guard found his truck still parked at the marina the next morning, but no sign of him or the boat. They searched for 3 days before calling it off. But the boat is here, I said, confusion evident in my voice. If he went down with it, how did it end up at a county auction? That's what I've been wondering for 40 years, Roland replied. The boat showed up 2 weeks after Samuel disappeared, tied to a dock in Delavan Lake, 15 miles south of here. No Samuel, no explanation. The registration led back to him, but by then he'd already been declared missing, presumed drowned. Felt the ground shifting beneath me, not literally, but emotionally. Everything I thought I knew about my purchase was wrong. This wasn't just some abandoned boat I'd rescued. It was evidence in an unsolved disappearance. The police investigated, of course, Roland continued. But Samuel lived alone, worked odd jobs, didn't have much family besides me. I was stationed overseas then, couldn't get leave for 6 months. By the time I made it back to Wisconsin, the trail was cold and everyone had moved on. What do you think really happened to him? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Roland was quiet for a long moment, studying the boat like he was seeing it for the first time in decades. Samuel wasn't the type to go out in bad weather, and October 15th was calm and clear. He was an experienced sailor, knew this lake like the back of his hand. And there's something else. He pulled out another photograph, this one more recent, showing a younger Roland in military fatigues standing next to an older man in a sheriff's uniform. This is Sheriff Martinez. He worked Samuel's case back then, and we stayed in touch over the years. Before he retired 5 years ago, he told me something he'd never put in the official report. The night Samuel disappeared, Martinez got an anonymous tip that there was drug smuggling happening on the lake, but when he tried to investigate, he was told to drop it by his superiors. My stomach dropped. You think Samuel saw something he shouldn't have? I think my brother stumbled onto something dangerous and someone made sure he couldn't talk about it, Roland said grimly. The question is whether any evidence still exists. I looked at my boat with new eyes, seeing not just the beautiful restoration I'd completed, but the potential secrets she might still hold. 3 weeks of intimate work on every inch of her, and I'd been focused on making her pretty again, not on what she might be hiding. There were some spaces I didn't fully explore during the restoration, I admitted. Storage compartments that were sealed up, areas behind panels that seemed original to the boat. I thought they were just empty space. Roland's eyes sharpened with interest. Samuel was methodical about everything. If he discovered something important, he would have documented it, and if he felt threatened, he would have hidden that documentation somewhere safe. The implications of what he was suggesting hit me like a cold wave. If Samuel had been murdered for what he knew, and if evidence of that knowledge was still hidden somewhere on this boat, then I might have unknowingly purchased more than just a restoration project. I might have bought a murder weapon, or a witness, or a target. I need to ask you something, Roland said, his voice gentle but serious. And I understand if the answer is no. But would you be willing to help me search this boat properly? Not just for my own peace of mind, but because if Samuel died trying to expose something illegal, maybe it's time someone finished what he started. I thought about my financial situation, about the plans I'd made to flip this boat for profit, about the practical considerations of getting involved in a 40-year-old mystery. Then I thought about Samuel, a young man who might have died trying to do the right thing, and about the brother who'd spent 4 decades wondering what really happened. Looking at Roland's hopeful, haunted expression, I realized that some decisions aren't really decisions at all. They're just acknowledgments of what you already know you have to do. When do we start? I asked. The decision to help Roland felt like jumping off a cliff, but it was the first time in months that I'd chosen something meaningful over something safe. That afternoon, we met at the cottage to plan our search. Celia was doing homework at the kitchen table when I explained what we'd discovered. So this boat belonged to someone who might have been murdered? She asked, looking up from her math worksheet with the kind of matter-of-fact curiosity that only 12-year-olds possess. We don't know for sure, I said carefully. But we're going to find out. Roland spread Samuel's photograph and some old marina documents across the table. My brother was careful about everything he did. If he found something important, he would have documented it and hidden it somewhere secure. During the restoration, I noticed some odd spaces, I admitted, compartments that seemed sealed from the factory, areas behind panels that I didn't open because they looked original. I was focused on making her seaworthy again, not archaeology. Celia set down her pencil. Can I help? I'm good at finding hidden things. I started to say no, to protect her from whatever we might discover. But Roland spoke first. Samuel would have liked you, Celia. He always said the best investigators are the ones who notice what everyone else misses. The next morning, we met at the marina before sunrise. Roland brought a toolbox filled with precision instruments from his days as a Navy mechanic. I brought the flashlights and crowbars. Celia brought her phone to document everything we found. We started with the obvious places. The cabin storage had already been cleaned out during my restoration, but Roland knew things about boat construction that I didn't. He showed me how to identify original factory seals versus aftermarket modifications. Here, he said, running, his fingers along a panel behind the galley sink. This was added later. See how the screws don't match the others? When we removed the panel, we found a small waterproof container wedged into the space behind the water tank. My hands shook as I pulled it free. Inside were 3 items that made my breath catch: a leather-bound journal, several marina charts, covered in handwritten notes, and a stack of black and white photographs. Roland's voice was barely a whisper. That's Samuel's handwriting. The journal entries started normal enough. Fishing reports, weather observations, maintenance notes. But as we read deeper, the entries became more concerning. Samuel had begun documenting unusual nighttime activity at various marinas around the lake. October 3rd, same boat again at Fontana Marina, 2 a.m. loading, no fishing gear visible, 3rd time this month. October 8th, followed them to Williams Bay, unloading into panel truck with no plates, counted 12 crates, all unmarked. October 12th, they know I've been watching. Got a phone call tonight. No one spoke, but I could hear boats in the background. Need to be more careful. The photographs showed boats being loaded and unloaded under cover of darkness. The marina charts had routes marked in pencil, with times and dates noted at various points around the lake. Samuel had been conducting a one-man surveillance operation. The final journal entry was dated October 14th, the day before Samuel disappeared. Meeting with Sheriff Martinez tomorrow. Have enough evidence now to prove the smuggling operation. Hidden duplicate documents in the anchor well in case something happens to me. If anyone finds this, the real proof is there. Roland's hands trembled as he read his brother's last words. The anchor well. Did you check it during the restoration? I felt my stomach drop. I cleaned it out, but I didn't take it completely apart. There's a secondary compartment at the bottom that I couldn't access without major disassembly. Celia looked between us. So, we need to check that compartment? Tomorrow morning, Roland said firmly. Early, before the marina gets busy. If Samuel hid something there 40 years ago, it's waited this long. But I have a feeling we're not the only ones who might be interested in what he documented. As we carefully repacked Samuel's journal and photographs, I realized we'd crossed a line. We weren't just investigating anymore. We were following in the footsteps of someone who'd been killed for asking the wrong questions. The smart thing would be to take everything to the police and let them handle it. But looking at Roland's face, seeing 40 years of wondering finally, replaced with hope for answers, I knew we had to see this through. Samuel had tried to do the right thing and died for it. The least we could do was make sure his sacrifice meant something. We just had to hope that whoever killed Samuel wasn't still around to stop us from finding out the truth. Dawn came gray and misty, the lake so still it looked like glass. We arrived at the marina before 6, when the only sounds were water lapping against hulls and the distant call of a loon. Roland had barely slept, and I could see the weight of you. 40 years of questions in the set of his shoulders as we approached Slip 18. The anchor well was located in the very bow of the boat, accessible through a deck hatch that I'd painted over during restoration. It took 20 minutes of careful work to remove the hardware without damaging my new paint job. When we finally lifted the cover, the smell of old water and metal hit us immediately. There, Celia said, pointing her flashlight beam into the narrow space. At the bottom, behind that crossbeam. She was right. Wedged into a space barely large enough for a shoebox was another waterproof container, this one larger than the first. Roland's hands shook as he pulled it free. 40 years of wondering about to end. Inside were documents that made Samuel's journal look like casual observations. Detailed photographs taken with a telephoto lens showed faces clearly, boat registration, numbers, even license plates of vehicles involved in the smuggling operation. A handwritten ledger documented dates, times, quantities, and most damaging of all, a list of names. Local business owners, marina operators, and 3 county officials were all documented as part of the operation, but it was the final item that made my blood run cold, a confession letter Samuel had written but never sent, detailing everything he'd discovered and naming Vincent Dalton as the operations leader. Vincent Dalton, who was currently on the marina's board of directors. Vincent Dalton, who I'd seen around the marina during my restoration work. Vincent Dalton, who was walking toward us across the dock right now. "You folks are up early," Vincent called out, his voice friendly but his eyes calculating as he approached. He was a big man, probably in his 70s now, with the kind of presence that suggested he was used to being obeyed. I quickly closed the container and set it aside, trying to look casual. "Just wanted to get an early start on some engine maintenance," Vincent stepped onto the boat without invitation, his gaze moving from Roland to me to the open anchor well. "Find anything interesting down there?" "Just some old fishing tackle," Roland replied, but I could hear the tension in his voice. Vincent smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "You know, I remember when this boat used to belong to a young fellow named Samuel Murphy. Curious. Kid, always poking around where he didn't belong. Shame what happened to him." The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, sent ice through my veins. This wasn't the tone of someone expressing sympathy. This was the tone of someone issuing a warning. From what I heard, Samuel Murphy was trying to do the right thing, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Vincent's expression hardened. Samuel Murphy was a troublemaker who couldn't mind his own business. Some lessons take 40 years to learn, but they're still worth teaching. That's when I realized Vincent hadn't just happened to show up early. He'd been watching us, probably, since we'd started our investigation. The question was whether he knew what we'd found. "Mr. Dalton," Roland said quietly, "I think it's time the truth about my brother came out." Vincent looked at the container I'd set on the deck, then back at Roland. "The truth is that some secrets are worth keeping, and some people need to learn when to stop digging." Celia, who had been silent through this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Too late for that. She held up her phone, showing the screen. "I already sent everything to my mom's friend at the sheriff's department. All the photos, all the documents, everything." Vincent's face went white, then red with rage. For a moment I thought he might try to grab the phone or worse. But then he seemed to realize the futility of it. The evidence was already out there. Copies made. Authorities notified. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We finished what Samuel started," I replied, "and now everyone's going to know exactly what happened to him." Vincent stared at us for a long moment, 40 years of secrets crumbling around him. Then he turned and walked away without another word, his shoulders sagging with the weight of inevitable justice. As we watched him disappear into the marina parking lot, Roland put his arm around my shoulders. "Samuel would have been proud of you both," he said softly. "You did what he couldn't finish." I looked down at the evidence container, then at Celia, who was still holding her phone like a weapon. My 12-year-old daughter had just helped solve a decades-old murder case. The boat I'd bought to flip for profit had instead delivered justice for a young man who'd died trying to do the right thing. Sometimes the most important discoveries aren't the ones we're looking for. 3 months later, I was standing in the same courthouse where my divorce had been finalized, but this time I was watching Vincent Dalton and 2 of his associates being sentenced for conspiracy, murder, and 40 years of covering up the truth. The judge's words were clear and final. Vincent received 25 years to life for Samuel's murder. Roland sat beside me in the gallery, tears streaming down his weathered face as the gavel fell. After 4 decades of wondering, he finally had justice for his brother. Samuel Murphy's name was cleared, his death officially ruled a homicide, and his courage in standing up to corruption was recognized by the court. The reward money from solving the cold case was substantial, but it wasn't what changed my life the most. The local news coverage of our discovery led to something I never expected. Job offers from 3 different investigative firms who were impressed by my determination and attention to detail. Instead of taking any of them, I made a decision that surprised even me. Using the reward money as seed capital, Roland and I opened Murphy & Associates Marine Investigations. We named it after Samuel, honoring the young man whose courage had made it all possible. Our first case came from an insurance company investigating suspicious boat fires. The second was a family looking for their missing father whose sailboat had vanished during a storm. By winter, we had enough clients to hire part-time help and move our office from my cottage kitchen to a real space in town. Roland brought 40 years of Navy experience and an encyclopedic knowledge of boats and lake navigation. I contributed the marketing skills from my corporate days and a stubborn refusal to give up when things got complicated. Together, we made an unlikely but effective team. Celia became our unofficial technology specialist, teaching Roland how to use digital cameras and showing me how to organize case files on spreadsheets. She also appointed herself our social media manager, documenting our cases and building our online presence with the kind of natural instinct that only kids her age possess. The boat that started it all became our floating office and primary investigative vessel. I kept her name simple, the Samuel M., in honor of the young sailor who died trying to do the right thing. She was equipped with underwater cameras, sonar, equipment, and all the tools we needed for marine investigations. But the most important thing I gained wasn't money or a new career. It was family. Roland became the father figure Celia had been missing since the divorce, teaching her to navigate by the stars and sharing stories about Samuel that kept his memory alive. For me, he became the partner I'd never had, someone who believed in doing what was right, regardless of the cost. 6 months after Vincent's sentencing, we were launching the Samuel M. for our biggest case yet, investigating a series of boat thefts that had stumped local law enforcement for 2 years. As Celia took the helm and Roland checked our equipment, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. I'd spent my last $1,000 thinking I was buying a boat to flip for profit. Instead, I'd purchased a mystery that gave me purpose, a partnership that felt like family, and proof that sometimes the best investments aren't financial at all. Samuel Murphy had died trying to expose the truth, but his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. His evidence brought justice, his boat brought us together, and his memory inspired us to help others find answers when the system failed them. The morning. Sun reflected off the lake as we headed out to our next case. 3 generations working together to ensure that other families wouldn't have to wait 40 years for justice. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to discover what you actually needed. If this story inspired you to never give up on doing what's right, even when it costs you everything, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about ordinary people who chose courage over comfort. Because sometimes the most important discoveries aren't the ones we're looking for, and sometimes the family we find is worth more than the security we lost.